If someone asked Lauren what she wants more than anything in life, she would confidently answer that she wants peace and quiet. Lauren was 17, and her life was like endless gray days without any joy. It all started after Lauren's mother died. Aunt Gabriella moved into her house with her son, Nick. Lauren's mother passed away after a long illness, and 2 years earlier, she had lost her father. The girl had been living alone for a while in the house left by her parents, until one summer morning, her aunt and cousin showed up at her doorstep. After making it clear to Lauren that they were not going to leave, Aunt Gabriella and her son began to set their own rules in the house. The first thing they did was to sell off what was left of their parents' belongings. Lauren tried to stop her and showed her the will left by her mother, which said that all the property belonged to her daughter. But Aunt Gabriella immediately snatched it from the girl's hands and tore it into little pieces. "Here's your will. Keep your mouth shut, or I'll throw you out like a dog," she muttered, gritting her teeth. Lauren's cousin Nick, skinny and tall, laughed approvingly and rubbed his hands, shaking with a hangover. Lauren, looking at her relatives with a look of hatred and pain, jumped out of the house and rushed into the woods to her father's gatehouse. She climbed onto the creaky bed and wept for a long time, cursing her fates. All her classmates were getting ready for graduation and waiting for a new life to come, and Lauren had no money for this happy life. The funds left by her mother were not enough to move to the city and go to college, and Lauren was doomed to live in this forested village under one roof with her aunt and her constantly drunken son. She could not rely on anyone's help. She had no other relatives except her aunt. Her neighbors and acquaintances could not do much for her. There was only one way out. Wait for things to change and believe that everything would be okay. But time passed, and still there was no change in Lauren's life. 2 years passed, and she still lived side by side with Aunt Gabriella and suffered her numerous reproaches. Her aunt assigned all the housework chores to her niece. From early morning until late at night, Lauren did the housework: cleaning, cooking, laundry, ironing, cleaning the floors, and shopping. One day, after another quarrel with her aunt, the girl went to a gatehouse in the woods where she often went to have some alone time. Lauren sank heavily on the bench and threw her head back. Clouds slowly drifted across the sky. A gentle breeze chased them far, far away, and Lauren really wanted to fly with them in the sky. While dreaming, she unnoticeably dozed off and suddenly woke up by a loud shout. She was very frightened. There were no people nearby, and so they could not scream. The cry was some kind of raucous, pitiful. It descended to a roar, then rose to a squeal, and in the twilight sounded especially eerie and dreary. Lauren sat frightened and listened to the sad, full of mournful call of some unknown forest beast. Finally, the cry subsided, but soon, a rustling sound and a strong crack of bushes were heard in the distance. Cautiously peeking around the corner, Lauren was surprised to see a little bear cub waddling toward the hut. He was funny stomped, bouncing, and kept turning his head, listening and sniffling at everything around him. When he reached the rainwater tank, the bear cub drank enough, then sat down and looked at the girl who had come to him. "So, it was you who roared?" she asked the bear cub. "Who hurt you?" The bear cub wiped his face with his paw and sneezed, then crawled over to Lauren and poked his nose into her leg. The girl quickly ran to the gatehouse and brought sugar left by one of the hunters and handed a few pieces to a furry guest. He instantly licked up the treat and roared again, much more cheerful this time. "Where's your mother, baby?" Lauren asked, frighteningly looking around for the bear. "Are you all alone?" The bear cub yawned, jumped up to the bench, and crawled under it. Soon, the girl heard him sniffling. The bear cub fell asleep. After sitting a while longer, she took some more sugar out of the gatehouse, put it next to the bear cub, and went home. The meeting with the little forest host brightened Lauren's soul a little, and the quarrels and disagreements with her aunt seemed to her petty, worthless. The bear cub turned out to be a she-bear, which Lauren later named Maggie. By the end of the summer, Maggie had grown a bit, but she was still living near the gatehouse, and the girl used to go there to make food for the bear. By then, Aunt Gabriella was no longer so strict with her. At the beginning of August, she had a heart attack, and now she tried to avoid all kinds of quarrels so as not to disturb her sick heart. Lauren's life was gradually getting better, and the girl believed that the reason for this was the help she had provided to Maggie the bear. Lauren believed that the boomerang of kindness had returned to her, and every time she looked at the bear, it seemed to her that the bear was thanking her, and Maggie the bear was indeed grateful to her rescuer. Whenever Lauren appeared at the gatehouse, she would come out of the woods and walk toward her, then lie down at her feet and blissfully close her eyes. And after a rich meal Lauren had prepared for her, Maggie would sit down beside her and lick her hands with her soft and smooth tongue, thus thanking her savior. And then the bear would rise and waddle away, only to return later. But one day, when Lauren went to check on Maggie, for some reason, she didn't come out to see her. The girl looked anxiously into the thicket and called out the bear's name, but Maggie didn't appear. When she looked around and didn't find her, Maggie was seriously worried. Suddenly, her memory flashed back to the hunters she'd seen in the store the day before. Deciding that Maggie was in trouble, Lauren ran to the gatehouse, threw a raincoat over her shoulders, and went in search of her forest friend. After fruitlessly exploring the familiar patch of woods that surrounded the hut, Lauren was about to head back when she suddenly heard a gunshot and a muffled roar that followed it. Rushing to the source of these sounds, the girl made her way through the dense thicket of junipers, rolled down a gentle slope, almost breaking her arm, and found herself on the shore of a small lake. And turning her head, Lauren saw a strange and mesmerizing picture. A man was standing by the water, arms outstretched and frozen, while Maggie was ducking her head to the ground against him. When the man could not stand it and backed away, the bear rose threateningly and waved her front paws. Who knows how it could have ended if, at that moment, Lauren hadn't intervened in the confrontation between the man and the bear. "Maggie, stop! Calm down!" she shouted, running down the slope toward the water. "You can't! Leave the man alone!" The bear immediately lowered her huge paws and let her nose toward Lauren. Then, turning to the man and growling menacingly at him, she walked slowly along the water's edge. When the bear disappeared behind the trees, Lauren walked over to the frightened stranger and peered into his face, white with fear. The man slammed his eyes shut for a long time, then dropped his backpack from his shoulders and gestured for Lauren to get water from it. Having drunk, he lowered himself to the ground and muttered, "Thank you." The stranger's name was Norman, and he had arrived the day before from the city with his hunting friends. But out of inexperience, he got separated from them in the woods and got lost. Being a she-bear, Norman presumptuously shot at it but missed, which made Maggie very angry. She forced him to step back towards the lake, and no one knows how it would have ended if Lauren hadn't arrived on the shore. Frightened that Norman could get into trouble again, she offered him a place to spend the night at her father's gatehouse. Norman agreed and followed Lauren to the huts. When they finally reached the place, it was nighttime. After lodging Norman for the night, Lauren was about to leave, but Norman grabbed her by the arm and held her back. "Stay," he whispered, wrapping himself in a blanket. "It's already late at night. Where will you go?" Lauren stayed. Having warmed up and relaxed, Norman told her a little about herself. After learning that he was a businessman who owned 2 hardware stores, Lauren looked at the guy closely and giggled. "You don't look like a businessman," she declared. Norman, embarrassed and even offended, turned to the wall and remained silent for a long time. "Well, don't believe me then," he said quietly. Then, abruptly dropping the blanket, he rose on his elbows and stared at Lauren. "Do you want me to prove it to you?" "How's that?" Lauren wondered. "Look, come to the city, and I'll show you my stores, and I'll also give you a gift. Any item is absolutely free. Yes, and the delivery is on me." He took a business card out of his shirt pocket and handed it to Lauren. The girl clutched it in her fist and stood up. "I think I should go." Lauren sighed as she buttoned her jacket. "Auntie will be worried, and you go to sleep. Good night." Norman grabbed her hand again, pulled her to him, and suddenly kissed her on the lips. Lauren wanted to slap him, but for some reason, she could not, and waiting for the kiss to end, jumped out of the gatehouse in the darkness of the night. She walked all the way home as if in a deep sleep, rushing from tree to tree like a shadow. Her lips still burned with that spontaneous kiss. Moreover, she wanted another kiss. This strange desire frightened Lauren, but she could not get rid of it. Upon reaching home, the girl silently slipped into her room and quickly threw off her clothes and dove into bed. For a long time, she lay there, thinking of Norman and their strange meeting, which involved a bear, and finally fell asleep. After the hunter friends found Norman, he stayed in the lodge for several more days. All that time, Lauren was by his side. Some strange, previously unknown feeling attracted her to him, and when she heard that Norman was going home, she became unbearably sad. When she went out to see him off, she could not hold back her tears, and Norman, noticing this, hugged her tightly and pulled her close to him. "You can come to me anytime," he said, stroking her hair. "Do you remember about the gift?" Lauren nodded, and with an embarrassing kiss on Norman's cheek, she walked quickly away. After walking a significant distance away, she suddenly remembered that she had forgotten to ask him for his address and decided to go back. But by that time, Norman was already far away. Remembering the business card, Lauren searched her pockets and was horrified to find that the card was gone. Dropping to the ground, Lauren tried to remember where she might have lost it, but it was in vain. Weeping with hopelessness and deciding that she would never see Norman again, the girl went home, cursing herself for her indiscretion. Lauren spent the whole week as if in delirium, thinking of Norman. Finally deciding to go to the city and find him there, she took all the money she had left and began to pack. When Lauren was ready to leave, something incredible happened. A car pulled up in front of her house and Norman got out. "Hi, I've been thinking about you all the time," he confessed to Lauren, who came up to him. "I've been out of my mind, and now I've decided to come here." "I've been thinking about you too," Lauren whispered back. "I'm so happy you're here." She pulled against the guy with her whole body and trembled, and Norman, meanwhile, took something out of his pocket and smiled. "This is for you," he said, handing Lauren the gold ring. "I want you to be my wife." Lauren, accepting his gift, pondered for some time what she should do about it. Norman, seeing her excitement, put the ring on her finger himself and smiled. "I agree," replied the girl, not believing her eyes and ears. At that moment, Aunt Gabriella came out of the house. When she saw the young people embracing, she immediately understood everything and shook her head. "Well, I wish you happiness," she said in a trembling voice. "Love each other." Lauren and Norman turned to her and nodded. "Thank you," they answered together. 1 year after Lauren's and Norman's wedding, their family had their eagerly awaited firstborn son. They named him Patrick. By then, Norman took his wife to a new 2-story mansion near a large lake. Every morning, waking up and taking her son in her arms, Lauren would go out to feed the swans and ducks. It was the most beautiful thing fate could give her. The girl could still not believe in the fairy tale that surrounded her, and was afraid that it might disappear like a desert mirage. And every time she realized that everything was real, she blissfully closed her eyes. But as it turned out, Lauren was afraid for a reason, and the end of the fairy tale was almost there. One cloudy day after breakfast, she went shopping. For some reason, she decided to take her son with her, though she always went alone before, and putting warmly dressed Patrick in the stroller, she slowly walked down the street, looking at her son smiling from under the hood of his jacket. At the crosswalk, Lauren waited for the traffic light to change from red to green, making funny faces at her son to amuse him. Enraptured, Lauren did not notice how the traffic light turned red again. Coming to her senses, she pushed the stroller and ran across the still empty crosswalk to the other side of the street. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a white car appeared on the road. It rushed right at Lauren, and she, standing frozen in place, watched it approach, not paying attention to the shouts of gathered passersby. It was as if time stood still for her. Lauren couldn't scream or move an arm or a leg. The only thing she could do was watch the car move inexorably toward her and her son. "Why are you standing there? Are you crazy, girl?" shouted some man, rushing toward her. "Go away, quickly!" Coming to her senses by his shout, Lauren pushed the stroller with the last of her strength. The moment the stroller with the baby was in the stranger's hands, the car hit Lauren and threw her far back. Once on the pavement, the girl felt an unbearable pain throughout her body and screamed. Trying to get up, Lauren crawled a little to the side and lost consciousness. When she woke up, she realized that she was in a hospital ward. Trying to get up, Lauren suddenly fell off the bed, and screaming from the pain piercing her back, she began wriggling on the cold floor, beating it with her hands. At the noise came several nurses. They gently put Lauren back on the bed and called the doctor. "What are you doing here?" The doctor who entered the ward smiled at Lauren. "You should not move at all. Do you know what happened to you?" Lauren wrinkled her forehead, trying to remember everything, but the only thing that came to her mind was pushing the stroller to a strange man. "Is my baby okay?" she asked, looking at the doctor from under her heavy eyelids. "Is he all right? Please tell me he's okay." "Oh, don't worry. Your son is fine," the doctor said quietly. "He's with his grandmother now, so there's nothing to worry about. But you..." The doctor waited a moment, poring over some papers, then quickly looked at Lauren and sighed. "All in all, the situation with you is extremely complicated," he began in a quiet and sad voice. "When you were brought to us, you were in the other world. In scientific terms, survived clinical death. Fortunately, we managed to get you out of there, but your spine had to be reassembled piece by piece, like a construction set. And..." Lauren grabbed the doctor's arm and dug her eyes into his serious face. "So, will I be able to walk or not?" She impatiently interrupted the doctor. "Will I be able to stand on my feet?" The doctor wiped his face with his bandage and squeezed his eyes shut. "Theoretically, yes," he confirmed after a pause. "But it is very difficult to say when it will happen. I'm not a soothsayer, you know. First, you need a course of rehabilitation, massages, exercises, and much more. But in the meantime, you'll have to accept it and fight very hard and for a long time. Here's your vehicle for the next few years." He nodded toward the wheelchair standing by the door and quickly walked away. When the door behind him slammed shut, Lauren pulled the blanket over her face and cried. Not long ago, She could not have imagined that she would find herself in a similar situation, and now she could not even get up and go to the window to get a breath of fresh air. The only thing that kept her from completely despairing was the thought that her son was okay. Thus, the difficult, almost unbearable days of her new life began for Lauren. After spending almost 2 months in the hospital, she returned home, where her mother-in-law Sophia began to take care of her. She was a short, hunched-over woman who looked a little older than her 60s. 10 years of loneliness after her husband's death had left a mark of sadness and grief on her face. Sophia never looked Lauren in the eye and rarely spoke to her, preferring to do everything in silence. The girl felt as if her presence in the house depressed her mother-in-law, and Lauren asked to hire a nurse for her, but Norman flatly refused. "Come on," he brushed her off. "Mom will take care of you herself. She likes you, she just doesn't show it." But Lauren didn't feel that way. Her mother-in-law grew gloomier by the day, and she tried to get everything done for her wheelchair-bound daughter-in-law as quickly as possible. And to get away as quickly as possible. Sometimes, lying in her bed, Lauren would hear her mother-in-law arguing about her and her son, and these arguments cut her ears like sharp blades. Sophia was urging Norman to divorce Lauren, to take away her son, and forget everything that had happened. He said that he would think about what to do, although he did not need a wife in a wheelchair, but his conscience did not allow him to drive a sick woman out of the house. The girl cried in her room, realizing that in this condition, her husband did not need her, but she had to endure all the humiliation at least for the sake of her son, whom she loved very much. And one day, Lauren overheard some very strange conversation. Sophia was talking to someone on the phone while standing outside the door, and Lauren struggled to get into her wheelchair and drove closer and listened. "Yes, right. I need something like this, so there's no trace of it. Ask Sophia about something. Something like a sleeping pill. Don't worry about the money. I'll pay you well. Okay, great. I need just a little for her. I mean, for one person. No, it's none of your business, and it doesn't matter to you who it's for. All right, I'll meet you tonight and we'll discuss everything." Her mother-in-law smirked, and Lauren waited a little longer and went back to bed. The conversation she had overheard made her anxious. The conversation was obviously about Lauren, but what was Sophia up to? Trying to solve this riddle, the girl did not sleep all nights, and the next day, it all became clear by itself. In the morning, when Norman came to work, Sophia came into Lauren's room. She was unusually cheerful and friendly. She helped Lauren to get into the stroller and asked, "Shall we have some tea? I made an apple pie, and I think it's pretty good," she suggested to Lauren. The kitchen did indeed smell deliciously of pastry. Lauren nodded with a smile, gave no sign, and her mother-in-law wheeled the stroller out of the room. Once in the kitchen, Sophia began to pour the tea, and did it very long and noisily, as if she were distracting her attention from something important. When the cup of tea was in front of Lauren, the girl squinted at her and picked at the hot pie with her fork. "Why aren't you drinking?" her mother-in-law asked warily. "It's a delicious tea. A friend bought it in India." Lauren sighed understandingly and squinted. "I have no doubt at all about its amazing taste. It's just too hot," she lied without blinking an eye. "Let it cool a little." Sophia changed her face and wanted to say something, but at that moment, her phone rang. When she got up to answer it, Lauren swapped cups and finally sipped her tea. Lauren waited breathlessly for her mother-in-law to bring the cup to her lips. Without suspecting anything, Sophia took a sip and grimaced. As soon as she put the cup of tea on the plate, she clutched at her throat and shook, her eyes popping out of her orbits. Lauren was really scared and approached her and shouted. "Why did you want to poison me?" she shouted, keeping her mother-in-law from passing out. "Why? What have I done to you?" Sophia's face turned as red as a tomato, and she looked at her daughter-in-law with a fearful look. Lauren could not get an answer out of her and called an ambulance. Once the paramedics arrived, Lauren told them everything. The girl packed, took the sleeping Patrick from his crib, and wrote a short note for Norman. There was nothing else to keep Lauren in this house, and she carefully pulled her wheelchair down the ramp and went to the train station. Lauren wanted to go home to her hometown, where her parents' shabby but still comfortable home had been waiting for her for a long time. Back in the village, Lauren told her story to Aunt Gabriella, and her aunt, hearing all about it, waved her hands, then took her niece's son in her arms and began to slowly wiggle him, humming a lullaby. "And I kept waiting for you," she said to Lauren when the boy fell asleep. "I thought you were so mad at me that you didn't want to see me anymore." Lauren shook her head and suddenly remembered her cousin. "Where's Nick?" she asked, peeking anxiously at her aunt. Had he moved somewhere else? Aunt Gabriella bit her lip and turned gloomily. "He died," she said quietly. "It's been 40 days. Caught pneumonia and didn't make it. That's it." Her aunt continued to sing a lullaby, which sounded more like a silent wailing. Lauren threw the fallen shawl over her shoulders and hugged her gently, pressing her cheek against her. "We have no luck," said Aunt Gabriella, staring at little Patrick. "Maybe he will be lucky. Do you think he will have happiness in life?" Lauren did not know what to answer and only nodded silently. She also wanted her son to be much happier than she was, and decided that she would make every effort to do so. After autumn and winter had passed, spring returned to her native land, and by that time, Lauren had recovered a little from her ordeal, and most importantly, had learned to stand on her feet again. Walking on crutches, she would sometimes come to her father's old gatehouse and sit on the leaning porch, waiting for her old friend, Maggie the bear. But for some reason, she would not come. When she left, Lauren used to leave a few sugar cubes for her, and every time they were taken by mice and ants. But there was still no trace of the bear. Perhaps she had left long ago, never having waited for the girl. Sometimes, when Lauren was alone, she thought of Norman and his mother. After the divorce, she had not seen her ex-husband. He did not appear, preferring to silently send money to his son. She knew very little of her mother-in-law's fate. Norman had told her by phone that Sophia had suffered a stroke and paralysis as a result of poisoning, and that she was now confined to a wheelchair as well. When she regained consciousness, she confessed that she had intended to poison her daughter-in-law and wanted to beg her forgiveness, but Lauren was far away by then. One day, on a visit to the gatehouse, Lauren was surprised to find its door wide open. Walking around the gatehouse, the girl froze in wonder at the fact that some unknown young man was washing his head in a basin on the lawn. "You scared me," she said loudly, turning to the stranger. "What are you doing here?" The stranger rinsed his head with clean water, dropped the ladle into the basin, and looked at Lauren with a smile. "Am I that crazy?" he asked, wrapping himself in a towel. "Actually, I'm sorry. I never expected anyone to show up here." The man wiped himself with a towel, then slipped his jacket over his shoulders and walked over to Lauren. "Well, then, let me introduce myself. Kevin. That's my name," he said, holding out his hand to her. "And you?" Lauren introduced herself, and Kevin looked over attentively. "And why are you on crutches?" he asked. Lauren told him about what she had been going through. The guy listened to her very attentively. Then, he walked around in a circle and stretched his long fingers on his hands. "Do you mind if I take a look at your back?" he asked, rubbing his unshaven face. "Maybe I could help you in some way. Who knows?" Lauren, not knowing whether to be surprised or angry, reluctantly threw off her coat, then pulled up her t-shirt slightly and looked bashfully at Kevin. He didn't seem embarrassed at all, stepped right up to her and began examining her back. "Your spine is not like a spine, but it's like a straight plank. It shouldn't be like this." He grinned, moving his fingers from one vertebra to the other. "What were the doctors looking at?" "That's all right, we'll fix it now." He gently pressed on one vertebra, then the other, and did this all the way down her back. From her neck to her lower back, hearing the crutch, Lauren cried out. But by then, Kevin was finished and had put her shirt back on. "Try leaning forward and backward," he asked, watching the girl's every movement. "But slowly and carefully. No rush." Lauren bent gently forward, then backward, and was surprised to find that the bends were unusually easy. Kevin, seeing that his efforts have not been wasted, smiled in satisfaction. "Now, try to take a step without crutches," he asked again, stepping back a few steps. Also carefully. Lauren threw her crutches on the grass and moved her right leg forward. Taking a few steps forward, she staggered and almost fell, but Kevin immediately picked her up and led her to a bench. "Well, it's too early to talk about walking without crutches," he said as he sat down next to Lauren. "I think it'll get better in a week or so." Lauren looked at him in amazement and swallowed the lump in her throat. "Who are you?" she squeezed out. "How do you know all of this?" "I'm just an ordinary ranger. I came here from the neighboring village," he said calmly, breathing in the fragrant pine air. "And about your question, my grandfather was a good chiropractor. The whole village used to go to him. He taught me some things. Grandpa's been gone for 5 years, and his knowledge still helps people." Kevin looked at Lauren as she blushed embarrassingly. "So, will I be able to walk?" he asked, looking at her legs. "Without crutches?" "Of course you will. There's no other way," the boy exclaimed, clapping Lauren on the shoulder. "My grandfather helped people in even worse conditions." Lauren, encouraged by the good news of being able to walk, got up slowly, went to get her crutches, and walked back. "There you go, walking. And you were afraid," Kevin said with a smile. He got up, buttoned his jacket, and looked toward the thicket. "Well, I have to go to work," he sighed, holding out his hand to Lauren. "It was nice to meet you. Come to my place if you need anything. I will make some tea." Lauren, shaking his hand, nodded and smiled. "I'll be sure to come by," she replied. Kevin had already turned and was about to go, when suddenly, somewhere nearby, there was a deafening crack of bushes, and Maggie came out onto the lawn, along with 2 small cubs. When Maggie spotted Lauren and her companion, she turned her huge head towards her and sniffed the air noisily, then waved her paw and walked on, taking her offspring with her. "Oh my God, I almost had a heart attack," Kevin exhaled as the bear cub disappeared from sight. "I wonder why she didn't hurt us." Lauren looked nostalgically towards Maggie and shook her head. "She and I are friends," she said, turning to Kevin. "It's a long story. I'll tell it over tea sometime." Kevin smiled silently, slung his book bag on his shoulder, and strode into the thicket. Before he disappeared into the woods, he turned and waved at Lauren. The girl waved back and walked slowly in the opposite direction toward her house. She was eager to tell Aunt Gabriella about how the stranger ranger Kevin had restored her ability to walk, and she was eager to see Kevin again and to tell him the story of meeting Maggie the bear. Thinking about all this, Lauren walked leisurely past the huge pines and spruces, barely leaning on her crutches. Now she had no doubt that soon she would not need them. Their time was over, and for Lauren, it was time for something new and wonderful.